partnerships for new energy. This year, ENRich holds a deeper significance for us as 2018 marks the completion of 25 years of KPMG in India. Our people bring a joshful energy to work every day, including a passion for quality, expertise for innovation, and drive that will propel us to the next 25. To crystallize our differentiation in the market, our people's drive, we launched the Josh campaign. Josh is what differentiates us from others. On that joshful note, may I now invite Akhil Bansal, Deputy CEO KPMG in India.
Thank you, Vandana. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of KPMG in India and its leadership team, a very warm welcome to each one of you in the room, and a very warm welcome to all the panelists who are going to discuss issues and challenges and opportunities today. I'm delighted to see how the ENR sector industry stalwarts have gathered here today, and I'm proud to welcome each one of you for this momentous occasion. Recently, we in KPMG in India celebrated our 25th milestone. KPMG in India's story began 25 years back in 1993, when few professionals started the creation that has become the youngest and the fastest growing professional services firm in India. And I'm proud and delighted to be associated with this journey with the firm for almost 22 years of the 25 years journey the firm has had so far in India. We are also proud of the many milestones we have achieved in this short journey of 25 years in the country, and the little contribution we could make to the nation building so far. And I'm sure the journey in the next 25 years will be even more exciting. But all this would not have been possible without the trust clients put us in. And our sincere gratitude and thanks for supporting us as clients or otherwise. Without you, our journey would not have been as meaningful as it has been. Talking about this event, ENRich, the energy sector in India is going through significant transformation, or if I can call it, disruption for last few years. ENRich is KPMG in India's flagship event, and we have been getting all of you together to discuss the live and real issues and challenges and opportunities in the sector. And that makes this event so fulfilling for us. We are proud to launch the 9th edition this year, and we are looking forward to discussions through the day about the industry and about going forward. We realize ENRich over the years have created a community of professionals that deliberates all these issues and challenges, and we realize how valuable the community is. In essence, it's a partnership, and that's the theme for the 9th edition of ENRich, New Partnership for New Energy. With that, ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and making it to the program. And I hope you will find your time well spent by end of the day. With that, let me hand over the baton to my colleague Anish Dey. He's head of ENR sector for KPMG in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Let me start with some perspectives that we carry and following on from what Akhil has been saying. We live in a volatile world of energy and natural resources. Oil, which was at $119 high in 2013, actually it went up to $148 momentarily in 2014, came down to $28 per barrel in 2016, and this year has been between $86 and thankfully at this point of time lower around $58, $60. So the volatility which we are seeing in this world of energy, including exemplified by oil, has implications for us because we are a consumer economy. Our consumption is growing fast and is going to continue to grow fast for the next 10, 15 years for sure. As the economy gains strength, as our demographics play out, this is our reality, that we are going to be dependent on energy and energy commodity imports. You are aware that we import about 82% of our oil and about 50% of our gas. Now, when that is combined with the currency effect, and the effect on it causes on the currency is quite significant. So if you look at currency itself, in fact, this year is varied between 63 and 74. In 2013, it was again a big variation between 53 and 69. And when you see the overall fiscal impact, the balance of payment impact, and the rupee impact, it's all a cascade. And this is why it becomes so much more important to talk about these issues and see how we can deal with them. If we go to power for a moment, switching from oil to power, power has seen on the exchanges in particular a fairly stable period, but it started going up now. This year, the average has been close to 4 rupees, but it again momentarily hit 18 rupees per kilowatt hour. And it's not a one-off. We are seeing more of those playing out as we go along, resulting in the increase in those prices of electricity on the market, and hence the costs to the end consumer, the distribution companies and the end consumers. It's been very volatile, especially in the recent years, this year. If you look at other commodities, aluminum being an example for metal, after a stable period, we have seen a significant spike this year. And that possibly means good things for the producer community. But for the consuming nation that we are, all these commodity prices and the volatility of the commodity prices has a very significant implication. It's not just a volatile world, it's a disrupted world in energy. Solar tariffs, you're well familiar with it, 5 rupee 50 dropping to 2 rupee 44, has not only disrupted other energy forms. In fact, these prices have disrupted solar itself. It's become now a very, very difficult investment proposition. My colleague partner, Santosh Kamath, who's anchored and authored 3 editions of The Rising Sun, our thought leadership publication, which has been coming out for several years now. I mean, 3 editions have come out over a 6-year, 7-year period. He and the team had predicted that this fall would happen. It just happened faster than we thought. The direction remains the same, but it's been very, very disruptive. Similar story with wind. It was under the feed-in tariff regime, came under competition in the recent years, especially in the current year, and we are seeing prices which are not just low, but are disruptive. Storage. Another story playing out over here. We are seeing the cost curve playing pretty much like solar, and the expectation is that it's going to go down further over a period of time. But that is not just because of production or productivity. It is also because of new chemistries coming and disrupting the old chemistries. Many of you would have read The Economist 2 editions back. There's a gentleman by the name of John Goodenough who first invented the lithium-ion chemistry, the basic chemistry which goes into our batteries today. He is 94 now. He's working in alternate solid-state chemistries, lithium glass as the electrolyte, which is going to see the light of the day, he believes, and he believes with conviction in the next 5 years in production, between 5 and 10 years. So this is another world which is not only disrupting the way we use energy, store energy, manage energy, but that world itself is getting disrupted. We live in a very fragile world. These are organizations which you would recognize, organized in the descending order of age. GE, IBM, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook. It is an inverse relation to their market capitalization. So the older you are, the lower your market capitalization is. Now the irony is that these are all tech companies. GE is the original technology company. We'll all recognize that. IBM is the original technology company. But they are struggling. Especially this band in between is doing well. So what we recognize over here is not a question of tech versus non-tech. It's a question of how to deal with legacy. Because the moment you build up legacy, that becomes that much more difficult a journey over here. And these companies in between Microsoft and Google and maybe even Facebook, which are in that middle portion over there, possibly are managing this journey better because they do not have legacy. We have created our known legacies in India in the power sector, in the energy sector, some of those not welcome legacies. We are being disrupted. 50 to 60 gigawatts of assets are under severe stress. Thermal power assets are under severe stress. 12 to 13 gigawatts of gas-fired assets don't work because they can't afford the price of gas and the market mechanisms don't allow that. 35 to 40 gigawatts of conventional power, which is operational, is going to go into bankruptcy, insolvency proceedings. There's 50 billion of debt and equity capital at risk. If you are a lender, you're happy to get away with 50% of your original capital return back home. This is the situation we are in. If you are an equity holder in those organizations, I think you've already wished your equity away, or you no longer have any expectations from it. Yet, among all that disruption, all that fragility, we do have possibilities. We have seen possibilities play out. Today, after Saubhagya, only 4% of our households remain unelectrified. And that's a momentous achievement by any measure. Ujjwala has helped reach LPG coverage to 90% of the country. There were 6 crore free connections given away, but the way that has transformed lives is an example worth seeing. The Urja Ganga pipeline, which is being built on viability gap funding, is connecting up on the gas grids various parts of the country, all parts of the country in an amazing way. And that's what is enabling gas to reach 200 cities or city gas distributions across the country. I was in the Northeast, and I've seen how infrastructure and energy infrastructure has made a difference to the whole economy and the spirit of Northeastern India. So that's something which is a huge, huge possibility playing out at this time. Going on, the Ujjwala LED scheme has demonstrated to us that it's possible to be environmentally friendly, not just friendly, but more than that, proactive on the environmental front, and match it with good economics because it's saving 16,500 crores of rupees a year, a massive amount, and 33 million tons of CO2 per year. So within this mixed story, and many of you are from the industry, many of you are investors, you do have your questions in your mind. How do we plan our investments when it's so fragile, so disruptive, such investment cycles are so short? How do we become digital natives in a very, very traditional industry? How do we meld the old with the new? How do we deal with legacy? How do we get more focused on the consumer? How do we work with partnerships, in partnerships? How do we? I don't think we'll have all the answers. We'll be lucky if we get most of the questions on the table right, but we'll try and do that. We'll explore, we'll debate, and we'll discern. Welcome to ENRich 2018. Now, on that note, I'm going to invite a speaker who has much deeper perspectives, much better perspectives, much clearer thought and articulation than I have. And he's spoken at ENRich before. He's been a friend of the KPMG. But personally, I have found it very, very engaging to converse with him. He was the chairman of Shell in India earlier. He's currently the chairman of Brookings Institution in India. A thinker, a writer, speaker. Vikram Mehta for you.
Thank you very much, ENRich. I have to say that your presentation was quite superb. I learned a great deal, and in a way I was worried that if you carried on, I would have nothing to say. Not because you've stolen anything that I want to say, but because it's so interesting and the data that you've presented is so succinct and revealing that anything that follows would be could be a dampener. No, I'm greatly honored to be here, ladies and gentlemen. As ENRich said, this is my second talk at the ENRich, and it's an honor. The topic of my talk today, as requested by ENRich, is the geopolitics of oil and energy, I guess, with implications for India. The implications for India, I think, will have to be, in some senses, inferred. I will cover that. But as you can appreciate, this topic is a very deep topic. It's a fascinating subject, but it cannot be covered in any great depth in the 15 to 20 minutes that have been allocated to me. So my talk is going to be kind of a broad brush approach to this topic. I'm going to cover this subject in 4 parts. I'm going to set the global backdrop. I'm going to provide a sense of the global setting against which we need to, in India, review our policies. I'm going to also then talk about specifically about the geopolitics of oil against the broad macro global setting. Then move towards a kind of a general review of India's energy sector, and then end with 4 or 5 specific recommendations. So just to again put everything in perspective, I was in the oil and gas industry for many, many years, but I have been out of it, at least out of the operational aspects of it, for the last 7 years. So you will forgive me if some of my data or some of my comments might be a bit inaccurate, but that should be, I should be given some leeway or latitude. Let's talk about the global the world in which we live. It's become as you can appreciate, a very risky world. All of the major assumptions that that we held on to in the aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 have somehow been upended. Liberalization, globalization, the market economics, these are all now coming under question. Populism, nationalism, unilateralism, these are the terms that are on the rise. We see in country after country the coming to power of individual leaders who are more focused on themselves, who have very good exaggerated egos, who are concerned about the domestic constituency, who have in a way questioned globalization, multilateralism, and indeed even multiculturalism. Immigration is now on everyone's agenda. Refugee camps proliferate. So we are seeing a world in which the liberal order that was actually defining the post-World War II global setting is being upended. We have in America a prime minister who has actually made, his foreign policy has now been defined by, you might say, a two-step approach. First, you hurl an insult and threaten global disaster, Armageddon. Then you calm the resultant crisis by offering concessions, and you finally claim success for solving the crisis that was created in the first place by your initial insult. So, the president of North Korea was a madman. Then he became the savior of his people and a man that Mr. Trump loves. So this two-step approach to foreign policy is causing confusion in the world. It's also caused a great deal of unpredictability. We have a Europe where the concept of a confederated Europe, the European Union, is coming apart at the seams. And as you will all probably appreciate, Brexit is a classic example of political self-goal that has had and will have huge but avoidable ramifications for not just the British people, but for, in a way, Europe itself. We see China resurgent and ironically looking to fill the space that the US has created by withdrawing into an isolationist shell. We see US and China in an adversarial relationship. The trade wars that are currently under discussion or in the offing are in effect a proxy for a conflict between an incumbent dominant power, the US, and a rising power, the China. In Russia, there is a president who is, in a sense, looking to recreate the Soviet Union. He doesn't much care about words like stability. He is a strong man. He's looking basically to redeem the Russian pride. He feels that 1989 really led to the collapse of the Russian imperial identity, the Russian identity, and he wants to rebuild it. In Middle East, well, the Middle East is a cauldron of instability. Civil war in Yemen, the civil war in Syria, the tension between Shia Iran and the Sunni Gulf, and of course the arrogance and, you might even argue, the utter stupidity of absolutist leadership, as reflected in what we saw in Turkey, the murder, the grisly murder of the journalist Khashoggi. I'm still astonished at how anyone could have imagined that you could carry out such an act and get away with it. It reflects, in my mind, the arrogance of leadership that believes that they can do what they wish without considering the reactions of the global community. And of course, here back home in South Asia, we have an adversarial sort of relationship with Pakistan. Two nuclear powers are staring at each other. Who knows if there might be an accident, a misadventure. So that's the sort of global setting today. And when you use the word volatility, that volatility is actually engendered by these risks that we are seeing all around us. Compounding this is, of course, another very major concern, and that is that the global commons is still unmanaged. Paris was an example of an international fora where countries got together and were able to hammer out a deal on climate change and global warming, and that was a great step forward. But today, or rather last month, you all must have read in the papers that the UN has just reported that the financial commitments made by the countries in Paris has still not been met. $100 billion were promised by the developed world to the developing world for meeting their climate change commitments. They are falling short by, as of now at least, $25 billion. And finally, one should also recognize that whilst technology has been has altered all our lives, it's still not clear whether it's a talisman, it will solve our problems, or whether it's a tool. There are many answers that we still have to find in addressing the issue of technology, and those answers have yet to be resolved. So my basic message here in my sort of opening remarks is that, look, the world that we are living in is facing huge challenges, and the institutional structures simply do not exist to address those challenges. I'm reminded, I read Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August some years back, and I recommend that strongly to every one of you. It's a story of the events leading up to World War I. And what it really is, sort of the underlying message that comes through is that World War I was not because of some grand sort of scheme of it that led to powers coming together and deciding that they were going to generate a global conflict. It was a series of unconnected, localized events that then converged in the aftermath of the assassination of the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary. It was a trigger. The Crown Prince's assassination triggered a global conflagration. Reason I'm mentioning this is that today, when you look around the world, you see all these different sort of, areas of risk and tension. They're happening locally, they're unconnected, there doesn't seem to be a common thread that links them. But I worry that if we do not create an institutional structure, if we do not have an institutional structure that addresses these problems in a unified, holistic way, one day the world will find that there is an event that sucks us into a vortex of uncertainty and then catastrophe, and we will find ourselves staring into the abyss of climate-induced devastation, geopolitical chaos, water scarcity, and God knows what else. So this is what really is the backdrop. It's a backdrop of concern, and yes, there are certainly very many issues that should give us hope, and as Anish said, there are many possibilities. But I think it is important that we appreciate the chasm, the divide between the populism, the nationalism, the jingoism of the leadership that is coming to power around the world, and the institutional structures that exist, which are unable to address problems that do not recognize national boundaries, whether they be climate change, pandemics, refugees, or whatever. And that's a big, big concern for me. Now, it's against this global backdrop that I think we have to see the emergence or the developments of the oil sector. It's the Anish showed some numbers just now, which I think give us a sense of the fact that the oil market is in no man's land. It's never been easy to call the oil market, that we've all known. But the fact that over the last 6 months, prices have gone from $85 to now for WTI to, $75 for WTI to now $55. It's dropped 30%. Just goes to show that this market is a market that no one really has been able to call. And the reason why that's the case is simply because the oil market is not driven just by the fundamentals of demand, supply, and inventories. It's also driven by the non-fundamentals, you might say, of geopolitics, speculation, and emotion. I mean, if you look back 6 months, Trump announced his withdrawal from America's withdrawal from the JCPO in May. And prices started to harden because people expected that, within 6 months, 1.5 million barrels of oil per day would be taken out of the market from Iran, and that OPEC or the world did not have the spare capacity to offset that shortage. What happened subsequently, of course, is that there was an unexpected surge of production from the US, so much so that last week or 2 weeks ago, the US, which had been importing, not 7-8 years ago, was importing 8 million barrels a day, is now an exporting country. It is the largest producer of liquids in the world, over 12 million barrels a day. But it also, 2 weeks ago, has started exporting 200,000 barrels a day. It's an extraordinary turnaround. This unexpected surge in prices, supply, of course, was reinforced by the still sort of very sluggish growth of demand, and in inventory that is averaging a 5-year average. So these fundamentals would have suggested that the price is going to now slow down, and sure, the first $10 drop in the price of oil from, say, 75 to 65 was the result of these fundamentals. But the next $10 from 65 to 55, and I'm giving you just, rough numbers, just giving you broad trends. The next $10 drop was not because of fundamentals. It was not as orderly as it was in the first, as was the first $10 drop. The next $10 drop was because of the non-fundamentals of geopolitics, speculation, and emotion. Well, geopolitics, I think, you all read about the various events that are taking place in the Middle East. Qatar has left OPEC. Trump decided in his true two-step style of foreign policy that perhaps Iran was not as much of an evil country as perhaps he'd made out in 6 months ago. He even offered an olive branch to Iran, and he decided to exempt many of his 6 countries from the sanctions. So there was a certain sort of geopolitical slackening, you might say. But more than that, the traders who had expected prices to continue to harden found themselves exposed. There were traders with open put positions, options, who were forced to sell futures in order to cover themselves. As the prices fell from one strike level to another, they kept selling futures and reinforced the downward trend. So the second sort of drop of $10, the second sort of phase of the oil price decline was in part the result also of the speculative behavior of the traders. And then finally, of course, there was the emotional element. If you look around the world, most of the large major producing countries, oil-producing countries, are controlled by individuals who are, who brook no dissent, who believe strongly in themselves, whether it's the Putin in Russia, whether it's the monarchs in the Gulf states, whether of course, Trump, can't ignore Trump, whether now the most recent actor on the world stage is going to be the president of Brazil, who is a clone of Trump's, and Brazil is going to emerge as a very major oil producer. All of these people are people who actually control the levers of oil policy in their country, single-handedly. And the most extraordinary example, you might say, of manifestation of emotion in oil policy was the reaction of Saudi Arabia to the condemnation that against MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, in following the disappearance and, of course, murder of Khashoggi. The initial reaction of the Saudi government was to issue a notice saying that please do not forget that we are a vital member of a part of the global economy. It was a not so subtle threat that they are going to actually use their oil weapon if the world continues to condemn MBS and or looks to threaten Saudi Arabia or sanction Saudi Arabia. And this particular threat actually came out in a publication called Arabiya, which is a Saudi official, in a way, semi-official publication. Of course, at that point, there was a real concern that prices might really shoot up, even go beyond $100. And that threat was doused by the Saudi minister very quickly, and prices started to fall again. But my larger point is that in understanding the oil market, we have to bring in now this component of emotion. And that is, you might say, the third non-fundamental that has driven the oil market over the last few years. So we have here the global setting. We have, as I said, an understanding of the drivers of the oil market. And now we look at it through the lens of India. India's energy situation, and you all have a very clear idea of it, but if I had to describe it in 3 sentences, it's very simply stated. Demand is surging. Supply is failing to keep pace with demand, and our environment is under great stress. That's really the essence of our energy crisis, and it is a crisis, I think. Demand is surging for, again, reasons that Anish alluded to. We have a very large population. This population is aspiring to trade up from a cycle to a two-wheeler to eventually a car. And our policies have encouraged wasteful consumption. The policy of subsidization has encouraged wasteful consumption over the years. There's also been no real effort to manage demand. So a combination of population, prosperity, and policy is perhaps the reason why demand has been accelerating at the pace, at the rate that we have seen it. Supply is failing to keep pace with demand, in part because we simply do not have the indigenous resources, and in part also because of policy and regulation, and in part because of our institutional structures of decision-making. We are not sitting on a sea of oil. We do have, 26 sedimentary basins. I know you know this perhaps better than I do. We have not intensively explored these basins. And we have a long way to go before the ratio of exploration to the area reaches even world averages. But the fact of the matter is that if and when we do find oil and or gas, it is more likely that we're going to find it in geologically complex structures, in deep waters or in complex areas, logistically complex areas, and it's going to be exceedingly expensive to monetize, commercialize those molecules. The probability of discovering oil and gas in our sedimentary basins may be high, but the probability, once discovered, the probability of bringing those molecules to the surface in commercial quantities is not that high. Okay? And that is a fact that we should recognize. So supply is a problem because of our natural resource endowment. Of course, we have abundant coal reserves, but as you all know, bulk of our coal reserves are dirty, and we must and we cannot afford to ignore the environmental implications of coal. And renewables, well, renewables we'll talk about a bit more, and we must keep talking about it always, but there's no doubt that renewables in some senses offers us a future, but as of now, as of perhaps the next few years, decades, it's only going to play a very small part in our total energy sort of picture. So supply is in part not keeping pace with demand because of our natural resource endowments, our geology. It's also in part because of our policy. Our policies have not really been encouraging of investment in exploration and production. It's only now in recent years that our contractual terms have become truly competitive. But if you were to ask some of the companies that have operational experience in India, you'd still find them actually concerned about the interface between their operations and the government, whether it's at the state government level or whether it's at the central government level. And it's across all aspects of the operations, whether it's the land acquisition, whether it's approvals to develop a plan, and I could go on and on. Pricing is still a political issue. I'm still told that the price of gas, for instance, remains a political hot potato. Governments issue diktats, but at the end of the day, governments still worry that perhaps if the price of gas was to be pushed, let's say, to $8 a million BTU, it might be seen as providing special preference to one industrial house, and that then becomes a political issue. So these are some of the problems that disincentivize private sector and indeed public sector capital into exploration, which again, of course, impacts the supply picture adversely. So policy, one can go on and on about it, but policy has been a deterrent. And I do think that government, and the minister is going to come later on today, recognize this and are making a real effort to try and overcome it. But it would be, I think it would be a mistake to ignore that even to this point, even now, there are many, many subtle or not so subtle, small, not so small issues that have to be overcome if you really want to create a level playing field for the investor. The institutional structures of decision-making are another reason why supplies have have not met their full potential. And I've said this many, many times in many forums, but we all recognize energy is a big issue for us, it's a major crisis, major problem for the country. We don't have an energy ministry. We don't have any one individual who actually looks at energy. We don't have an executive who has authority or responsibility for energy. Yes, we do have the Minister of Petroleum, or the Minister of Coal, or the Minister for Renewables, but is there someone who's actually looking at taking a holistic approach to energy? And that is important, that is required. Why? Because there's both complementarity and substitutability issues related to all aspects, all components of energy. And unless and until we take this integrated approach or have this integrated approach to energy, we're not going to be able to develop a policy which will then, of course, bear positively on our investment climate. So those are some of the reasons why supply has not really kept pace with demand in our country. And then finally, on the issue of environment, I don't have to say very much, but the reality cannot be pushed under the carpet. India simply cannot afford to develop now and clean up later. It just simply cannot. There is no doubt in my mind that if you were to do a pure cost-benefit analysis of, say, renewables versus coal, renewables falls off the edge. You cannot compete against coal, not now. There's a social cost, there's an economic cost and a social cost of actually displacing coal. There's no doubt about it. Coal is cheaper, coal is required to provide access, provide electricity to the 25-30% of the country that still doesn't have, or more, regular access to electricity. If you were to really push renewables, there'd be all those stranded assets that we're talking about would lead to a major problem for the banks that have lent money to power generators. But all said and done, if you were to ignore the environmental implications of your current coal-based energy policy, you're going to create an environmental disaster. And that is something that you simply cannot afford looking ahead. So in my view, the environmental issue has to be addressed up front, and it cannot be addressed or cannot be seen just through the lens of cost-benefit analysis. There has to be a much broader approach to it, a much deeper approach to it. So this is basically our energy sector. We have a problem here, which is, say, demand, supply, environment. These are three, broadly speaking, the problems that we face. And how are we going to address these problems is our big concern. What the objectives that we have, the government's objective is very clear, that they wish to provide universal access to people. They want to provide energy that is affordable. They want to make sure that the linkage between economic growth, energy demand, and environmental implication is weakened. So the objective is very clearly stated. The real problem is, how do we achieve this objective? How do we reach this objective of providing access to the people, reliable access, affordable access, clean access to all citizens of India? Now here, I think the first question, as I say, is to look at the decision-making structures of our country. I have talked about it already, but we need an integrated planning process. We need to be able to create an institutional structure that approaches the energy sector holistically. We need to also actually elevate the challenge of energy to a national level and make this an issue that everyone is involved with. A few years back, the Government of India legislated the Food Security Bill. I would say that it's time for us to now legislate in India what I would call the Energy Responsibility and Security Act, or the energy, which is a combination of the Food Security Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. If you were to add the two, Energy Security and Energy Responsibility Act. And the reason here for such an act is not so much to actually, it's not to shift the policies dramatically, it's really to make sure that people understand that the energy has to be seen as a subject that is dealt with at the highest level. I believe that we should have a Ministry of Energy, and that we should, within that Ministry of Energy, we should have departments or verticals that focus on petroleum, coal, renewables, and that this Ministry of Energy should be, ranked, the Minister of Energy should be ranked along with the Minister of External Affairs, Finance, and Defense. We need a policy mindset that is focused very much on balancing our short-term priorities with our long-term imperatives, long-term needs. So our short-term priorities, of course, and objectives must be to minimize avoidable losses, and whether it's transmission and distribution, whether it's the convergence of the tariff structure. Today we have 100 different tariffs for power. If you look at it across all the states and all the various sort of categories, there are 100 different tariffs that are applicable. We can't afford that kind of a divergence and variance. We need a rationalization of the tariff structure. We have today problems between the center and state, and the center has a certain approach to energy. The states have a different approach. The fact is that, for example, the one reason why the gas industry has not been able to implement a national gas grid efficiently is because the state governments don't allow it, give it right away. So these are some of the problems that have to be addressed, and they will be addressed most effectively if we are, A, taking a look at the energy business through the holism of a centralized Ministry of Energy, and secondly, we're looking to balance the short term with the long term. I do believe that that it's imperative that India now really aggressively looks to leverage its soft power. It has a very strong relationship with supplier countries. You know, Saudi Arabia minister was here a month and 2 months ago and reaffirmed his country's commitment to the Ratnagiri refinery, and made it very clear at a meeting that I attended where that they would, you know, ensure that India did not actually face the consequences of high oil prices. And as I think we read in the papers, he repeated that statement in Brazil. So we do have strong relationships, but I think that's not good enough. We need to actually make sure that China and Russia don't end up establishing a privileged relationship with the Middle East. China and Russia don't exploit the space that America has left behind in the Middle East. We are a country that has moral heft. We're a country that has a very strong relation. We have the ability to actually also now lead, and we should endeavor to ensure that over and above physical supply relationships with diversified countries, we create partnerships now with individual countries, and those partnerships are looking at not just developing a relationship on oil and gas, but across the entire energy spectrum. I think the final point I'd like to just make is that time has come now for us to to put the weight of the Indian state behind our efforts to build a global energy footprint. China competes against us effectively because the China Inc., or rather the sovereign state of China, supports the Chinese industry wherever they go. We don't do that. We don't provide that sort of support. And so I think the point has come that we now need to create national energy companies. ONGC is a great company, but it is only in oil and gas. And I'm asking myself, why doesn't it become an energy company? And these are some of the sort of simple suggestions which are not necessarily focused on the economics. They're focused on the institutional structures. It's focused on actually building up a relationship with the rest of the world that is based on India's moral position, India's economic potential, and India's leadership at a time when the rest of the world, in a way, is going into a shell. This is an opportunity for us, and this is an opportunity that we should exploit because India does actually need to recognize that it will be dependent on the rest of the world for meeting its internal requirements, whether it's to do with energy self-sufficiency or whether it's to meet our demands for sustainable growth. Thank you very much.
On stage, we are going to have a small memento for you. But while Akhil comes up for giving you that, Akhil, if you could come, Vikram, if you could just stay on stage for just a minute, and then we have a small green memento for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vikram. I think that was fascinating as always. We heard a lot of thoughts, ideas around those 4 verticals. We talked about staring at a fair crisis, fair energy crisis. Vikram talked about making it an issue. The time has come to make it an issue and find the institutional structures to deal with the issue. He also talked about ONGC in the end, that it's an oil and gas company, not an energy company. We do have colleagues from ONGC, and they possibly differ to say because ONGC has power assets. ONGC Tripura is one of the largest, gas-based power plants in the country. It has petrochemicals. But I think the point still remains that we are not exerting the power. Even if we have that spread, we are not feeling that spread. We are not exerting the spread. And I think that's something which we have to see progressively going forward if we really have to secure ourselves, because my estimate is that 5-7 years down the line we'll be importing 90% of our crude, up from 82% we stand today. With that, we are going to go into our next speaker, Ted Surratt, my partner, colleague from Australia. He's the global head of power and utilities, a globetrotter, very, very articulate on various issues. But before I go further into his introduction, let me stop there and actually allow him to make his own introduction. Can we have it, please?
Why is hydrogen suddenly making headlines? Is it because it's the most abundant element on Earth or something else? Hydropower is the leading source of renewable energy globally. China is the indisputable world leader right now in renewables. They've also got the largest solar array of 600 megawatts that they're actually planning for a site. This site uses open-cut mining to mine spodumene, which is a lithium ore. These trials, these prototypes, they really are important to better understand how the technology can be used at lower cost and also better assess the environmental impacts. I'm standing on one of Belgium's largest solar rooftop installations, and with the take-up of new technologies to look at how it affects their businesses and how they respond to the future. I believe that we need to keep on with trials like these, because that is going to help people with better understanding of technology and getting on the bus. This is Ted from Darwin. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back in India. It's amazing what you can do with an iPhone. I really like to get up and close and personal. I really like to look at things from the inside, to actually see things firsthand, see how technology, how innovation is making a difference, and sharing those insights with colleagues and sharing those insights with the industry. There is so much happening in our industry. So this year, there's been a lot of stories. A lot of stories that have galvanized our attention. And let's see, there's a bit of a delay here. Okay, so we've had a lot of stories this year. A lot is happening in our industry. And so many things are happening from a technology perspective, from an industry solutions. But one of the stories that has galvanized my attention, that has inspired me to think about the art of the possible, one of those big stories is not yesterday's big win, unfortunately, from India over the Australians in Adelaide, but it's this story. This story is about what happened in June, about the cave rescue in Thailand. That was one of the most inspirational stories that we've heard around the globe, around what it took to collaborate, to innovate, and how technology played a part on that. So today, what I'm going to do this morning is share my views of what I see from industry leaders around the world in the energy sector, and contrast some of the insights and the learning from the Thai rescue story to the energy sector. And to see how these learnings are relevant for our theme today, about new partnerships in new energy. So, are you with me? We're going to follow this story. And, in case you didn't know, India played a part with the Thai rescue. I'll talk a little bit more of that a bit later. So executives around the world, we've heard about this morning around how we're dealing with complexity and with challenges. We hear about this trilemma: security, affordability, sustainability. And like the cave rescue story, getting those boys, those 12 boys and their coach, out of that cave, out of that wet, damp, dark cave, it was not straightforward. It was complex. The International Energy Agency report, its World Outlook, released its document, the 2018 last month, and it called out in its opening paragraph in the executive summary that there are cracks appearing around this trilemma. There are pressure points around affordability, security, and sustainability. Let's have a quick round around the globe. And each country has got some of its own challenges. For the first time in 75 years, the US is now exporting more oil, more energy, than it actually has imported. Europe is decarbonizing at a different level in terms of their energy maturity, but the decarbonization agenda is well and truly well alive. Rising demand. Well, we've heard about today India, China, and the demand that's going to happen globally is occurring in this corridor, in this Asian corridor. It's not in Europe. It's not in America. It's here. The action is happening here. Imports. Well, your situation is very well known, but other countries as well. China is very much importing a significant amount of gas. Japan is doing the same thing. From Australia, we're exporting a lot of LNG right into the Asian corridors right now. Energy security. Some of you who follow Australia and other countries were pressed with this energy security issue. We have, at a different scale to yourselves, where Australia is heavily dependent on coal. It's 70% of our electricity generation, and we're increasing renewables. We're exporting, we've got lots of LNG, but we're also going right now through an energy crisis from an affordability perspective, and as we're increasing a large number of renewables into our grid, we are dealing with flexibility issues, grid stability. Now, in my time in the last, leading up to the conference today, was looking at some of the Brookings Institute material and speaking to my colleagues. Very much the rapid acceleration of some of the renewables in your grid, you're feeling some of those pressures. We are feeling that. Those of you in the energy sector would know that South Australia, Australia's got the longest grid in the world. And one part of the country, or actually where the cricket game was, in South Australia, they actually had a system black event that caused billions of losses to energy, to businesses. They went off the grid for 2 days. South Australia has got amongst the highest penetration of renewables in its grid in the world. Australia's got the highest amount of solar panels on consumer rooftops. Some areas, it's up to 35%. So we're having these challenges of grid stability into our network. Affordability. All of this is happening on a backdrop where in some geographies, the prices are rising and significantly impacting consumer affordability. It's at different levels. I appreciate energy affordability in its context is different to here than it may be in Australia or in Europe. But the issues remain the same. The prices are escalating. Network costs are escalating. The cost of firming up energy is having an impact. Green schemes are having an impact. And that is actually creating an affordability challenge. We closed in Australia some coal-fired power plants, 2,000 megawatts, like this. Prices on wholesale markets increased by 25% within 3 months. It was a dramatic dramatic impact on affordability in the Australian nation. We have gone from energy competitiveness from one of the 5th nations to down to the 13th, 15th. Very, very significant. And all this, what is it leading? This issue, you have this as well. It's about a lack of trust. Trust and the impact on the energy sector. We're joining some of the issues of some of our colleagues in banking and other areas. There's this, issues around populism are driving lack of trust by the population with some of their companies, with governments, and we're seeing that play out right now in France. And all of this, while this is happening, the CO2 levels, the first time in 3 years, have increased by 1.6%, and is set to be the same, going to happen again in 2018. So, when we look at these challenges, what I've wanted to do is, in my conversations with executives, having the chance to do these videos and speaking to clients, I've grouped the areas in terms of where I see people excelling, and I brought them into 3 buckets. One is around customer, people. One's around the role of technology and innovation. So let's come back to the cave. So the whole focus of this cave rescue, what was it? It was getting those 12 boys out of that cave safely. The focus of the government, the focus of all the people that were involved was very clear. Get those people out safely, notwithstanding the time pressures and the risks that they were under. Leading energy companies are looking at their consumers and looking at the people and making their customers, the energy users, consumers, businesses, the focus of their business and putting people first. Millennials, in some countries, millennials in the next 5 years are going to be more than 50% of the workforce. And their expectations around dealing with digital channels is very different to perhaps myself and the people from an older generation. We're all used to having, many of us now have got iPhones. We deal with digital channels in a different way. We expect an Uber experience. That is actually happening in advanced economies around energy. People want to be able, I've been into China, and they can actually, on their iPhone, choose their pay plan on their iPhone dynamically. It's incredible what is possible. And the executives, we did a global survey of chief executives, global chief executives in the energy sector, and it just calls it out here. You look at customer satisfaction, close to 80% of CEOs feel that they are just meeting their customer requirements or below it. It's about rebalancing this trust equation. So there is this imbalance that many organizations, consumers feel that they are not getting the value that they require. Energy companies, the leaders that are excelling at that, they're focused on tangible outcomes for their consumers, for their businesses. They're looking at choice and accessibility and transparency. Now, I don't know how it is here. I need to actually get some of my team members to show what a bill looks like. But I know back in Australia, if you actually look at your bill, it is very hard to understand. And the different plans, some of the retail companies, here would be discoms. You talked about the number of pricing plans you have. We have this big issue of people just don't understand their bills. It's made confusing. People stay on these long-term contracts, and at the same time, the plans are moving forward with better deals. So consumers are losing trust, and that's been driving that. So what are organizations doing around enabling a better customer experience? They're reimagining the future of energy from a consumer lens perspective. And we hear, those of you who are consultants, if you've worked with consultants, you would hear this customer centricity perspective. But it's really looking at the customer proposition and taking the problem from the consumer perspective and making that the center of their decision-making. Re-looking at their processes, customer journey from a whole end-to-end perspective, and ensuring that there's more transparency. There's more transparency in those customer engagements. Customer engagement is also driving where the energy companies are spending their capital for the next 5 years. So we hear this right now in terms of deep customer engagement, and the customers, the feedback that we're getting from customers is actually driving the capital plans of the future for the next regulatory period. And those organizations are doing that well. They're getting the tick by the regulator. They're getting greater engagement with their consumer group, and it's empowering them to be more transparent of where they're spending that money. So let's move on to the second area around technology. So you had a look at, saw the video. I'm quite fascinated by enabling technology and where things are happening. So this is really probably the area that gets me out of bed the most. So let's go back to the cave. The cave story, the rescue, they used some of the leading-edge technology and some of the not-so-leading-edge, low-tech technology. So they had 3D imaging that was used in terms of surfacing the cave. They had drone technology, global satellites. They had these a mesh radio network, but they also had these in terms of communication, it was handmade or homemade technology that was used to make it work. We had the medical doctors that had used not only technology, there was how they kept these individuals alive for the 18 days. There was a lot of technology that went into that. And on top of that, so this is Kirislav Brothers from Pune, that they had provided the enabling technology for backing out the water out of that cave. So isn't that great? That is where you came to the fold with many others in terms of solving these issues. But it's actually looking at technology for business outcomes. And Vikram made the point around, let's be mindful when we're looking at technology and that we are using this for the right outcomes. It's not technology for the technology's sake. So we look at what's happening in the energy sector. We all know wind, solar, battery costs are coming down dramatically. Your Indian solar auctions now, they're proving incredible results in terms of lower cost out of these auctions. But beware. In Australia last month, the largest solar EPC contract provider has gone into administration. They had bid at the lowest possible price to win some of these contracts. They made some commitments that were not able to be kept, and now we're in a situation where it's going to have a whole ramification to the whole supply chain. Now, does that sound a little bit familiar, or some of the challenges that is up in your mind around solar? But other technologies are happening at the same time. So we're seeing a lot more hybrid solutions between solar, wind, battery storage. Most of the auctions that are happening right now in our country and a number of others we're looking at hybrid solutions. So it's not just solar on its own. We're actually firming this up with battery storage solutions. We have still, for the time being, the largest battery in the world in South Australia. It's a 100-megawatt battery that's going into its second year of operation, and it's providing grid stabilization services to help through the summer. So we're making deep inroads with decentralized energy in our marketplace, and that is happening globally around the world. So these pressure points and how we're using the mixture of technologies is really important. This year, hydrogen is taking a lot of interest. And it's largely the Japanese who are most interested right now in hydrogen. And there's a pilot in Australia, $500 million pilot, that is going to we're going to use our brown coal, and we're going to gasify it into hydrogen, liquefy it, and send it to Japan to help with transportation, to help with energy supply mix, and this resurgence of the interest of hydrogen has really dramatically changed in the last 6 months. So any of these conferences right now, you will hear a lot more discussion on hydrogen. I think it's an opportunity as well from a supply chain perspective, maybe in the years to come. What could India do in that space? So I know that I've been reading a little bit more about that. But you look at all of this, and for me, it's not about winners and losers. It's about taking all of these technologies and using them for tangible outcomes for people, for the sector, and it's being much more agnostic. So my final area is looking at innovation. So how do we create a culture of innovation to support partnerships? There's a report by the World Energy Council, 2018, and it looks at all of these themes by country. And there's a section just on India. And in that Indian section, they've got a matrix of what's the top-of-mind issues for energy executives and what are the issues that they're focused on. What comes out in that report is very much a theme for India on innovation and the use of what's keeping some of your executives awake? Blockchain. Digital, IoT solutions. And one of the reasons as well that we set up the digital lounge up here on level 1, I encourage you to go and have a look at, because it actually showcases some of these solutions that are really changing the dynamics of our sector. But you look at innovation, and you come back to the Thai rescue. We had thousands of people working on that. 10,000 people were involved. 100 divers, over 100 government departments, 900 police officers, 2,000 soldiers. It was a mammoth task of collaboration. And that led to the innovation and the outcomes that they achieved. When we look at driving a culture of innovation, and when I talk to executives of really what is making the difference, 3 key ingredients come up. One is leadership. The leadership has to drive the agenda. They have to be absolutely bought in. A number of you would have made the opportunity to trek to Silicon Valley to have a look at where some of the leading areas of innovation. There is a lot of innovation happening here in India. I saw some of that last night. But using C-level leadership is not enough. It needs diversity. And if you look at everybody that was involved in that rescue, multiple countries, multiple people, different age, different backgrounds, different ethnicity, male, female. This morning we had a session on diversity, and it was a women's breakfast. And it's really critical. And when I see the organizations who are leading this, they are really using that lever. But diversity itself is not enough. It needs inclusion. And what do I mean by inclusion? It's giving people a voice. And it's giving people a voice in your teams to surface those ideas. So those are 3 of the key ingredients that I see of what people are doing to drive innovation. And some of the examples, they abound. You have a number of accelerator programs. One of the accelerator programs that we just launched in Australia, it's called RISE. And it's a program where we pair late-stage startups, so advanced stage startups, with mature, large corporate organizations. And what we do is we have streams where the startups are learning from the large organizations, and the large organizations are also learning from the startups, or the advanced stage startups. They're collaborating, they're learning. And it's a two-way street. And in this situation, it's actually a joint effort by industry, government, so public sector, private sector, organizations, consultants, all coming together to help drive innovation into their area. So let's come back. We know how the story finished. After 18 days, we woke up, we read the papers. They got the 12 boys and the coach out of that cave safely, from that wet, dark, underground cave. So let's let's imagine what it could mean for the energy industry here in India. So let's think, with all of the people, with the might of your wealth, of your nation. This was done over 18 days, 10,000 people. Let's think about how many people we have in India, the collaboration that's possible. Let's think what is possible. The outcomes after, say, multiply that 18 days through years and months, weeks, years, months ahead. Weeks, months, years ahead. Trust is an all-time high. People have confidence in the industry. They have confidence in all sectors, the supply chain of energy between corporates and government. Energy is affordable and secure for all. You've made dramatic strides in electrification. But it's a little bit like the tunnel. They had to go a long way into that tunnel to get those boys out. There is still a long way to to provide electricity and energy to the remaining Indians who do not have that full energy, do not have electricity and security of supply. So energy is affordable, reliable to all. You're a world leader in leveraging all your natural resources. Wind, solar, coal is going to have a continuing role to play. With good luck, perhaps you will unlock some resources in terms of oil and gas. We heard what Vikram had to say, but there's a long road to run. But you leverage what you've got, pumped hydroelectricity. Other countries right now, like I was in Brazil 2 months ago in September, their situation is they're dependent on hydroelectricity, and they're diversifying their mix, and they're looking at other levers. So they're using their natural resources. You're sharing your learnings with all your global teams. With your teams, you're learning globally. You have joined up last year with the a global arrangement for solar. I can't remember the exact name, but those partnerships are absolutely vital to drive collaboration and engagement and learnings that are going to help you, but also what you can bring back and export to the world. Investors are confident. So there are some challenges. There's some headwinds right now. But your investors continue to invest into India. They get a commercial rate of return. They're coming back. And they continue to invest for the long term. But it's got to be a win-win. And through all of this, you're enabling an orderly transition to a lower carbon environment and a significantly improved air quality for those of you who live across India and this great nation. And energy reforms are driving a successful outcome for all. So you need the policies to work, and you need to it's executing on those policies. And it's going to take all of you together to make that happen. So when we reflect on the cave rescue, and we think through how they focused on the people, how they focused on leveraging technology, and how innovation played a key role in that, your energy challenges can be overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted, very much. That's an inspiring story, and that's a great way to put it all together. I took away a few things from your conversation with the audience over here. I think the first thing, of course, was to have that focus, the singular focus over there. But what came out is that what do we do with that focus and the theme of partnerships? And I think you laid out a very clear agenda for us to say that how we should take the partnerships ahead. And it's not just about organization to organization. It's government to government, organization to government, startup to mature companies where both learn. It's a two-way process. You also talked about having the customer, looking at everything to the customer lens. I don't think we as an energy industry have done it globally well, including in India. We have not done it well. And that's where digital comes to play a role. And when you start going digital, you go down to the customer. I think that might change things over here. So thank you for that wonderful session with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
So we will break at this point of time and reassemble when the minister joins us at 12 o'clock. Of course, it's a politically charged up day, and so we need to gauge what he has to say, but hopefully on energy matters, he'll be as clear as he has always been with us. This will be the third visit of the minister to ENRich. He's been kind of patron for us. I'd also commend you to two other things in between in the break. You could go up to the digital lounge. Some of you have been there. I can assure you that we took inspiration from all these themes, but it played out in a fashion which I would definitely commend you to that, to go up and have a look at the digital lounge. Also, the ENRich app, many of you have downloaded. Otherwise, you can download it now. It allows you to kind of provide feedback on the sessions, go through the publications which have come out, and there are several publications which have come out on the event of ENRich. And finally, what we intend to do in the spirit of partnership is to take this whole collaboration ahead through the year, online and offline. Online, the ENRich app is going to be a platform for collaboration as we convert that from an event app to a collaboration app, online collaboration app. Through the year, we are also going to have multiple events here in Delhi, across the geography, on specific themes which come out of ENRich, so that we can keep that partnership which we have developed over the years with you ahead. With that, let's break for tea, and we come back at 11:55 if it's okay to have the minister with us. Thank you.